I've said before that when I do Rob Watches videos, that they're supposed to be first impressions. So whenever I see a new TV show, I'll usually give it three, maybe five episodes or so, depending on how into it I am or what's available at the time, things like that. But Samurai Jack is a very special case because this is an already established show that made a comeback. And by the way, if anyone out there has never seen Samurai Jack, uh, what are you doing with your life? Highly recommended for anyone who's an animation fan or even an animator or just generally someone that wants to write or tell a story because the show is amazing. The whole time it's done through this very minimalistic style where there's very little dialogue and they'll tell you the story through just beautiful visuals or actions or just very strategically placed sound cues, and it's done so well that if you've not seen it, you gotta see it. The problem with the show is that it just kind of ended one day. It was supposed to have a predetermined goal, but then suddenly production ended for many different reasons that I'm not going to get into right now. But then it was eventually kind of swept under the rug by Cartoon Network, and while there were a lot of fans of the show, a lot of us just felt like we really needed closure. Fast forward to last year when it was announced out of nowhere that Gendy Tartakovsky was coming back to finish the show, and it was going to be through Adult Swim, which means the show was going to be of a much more mature theme. In fact, I distinctly remember when that announcement happened. It just, again, it came out of nowhere, and I was actually playing games on Steam at the time, and when I finished, I came back to my browser and I saw hundreds of notifications of friends and people on social media just telling me about this. And in retrospect, I wish I did an editorial on it at the time, but time kind of slipped away from me. But let me just say, I was just as excited as everyone else. And all we knew at the time was that this was going to be more edgy and more adult. You saw promos where Jack gets stabbed, and you can see the blood coming out, and you see the pain in his face. And while the show was violent at times, usually Jack would fight like a robot or some kind of, inhuman creature or something like that, and it kind of helped it get past the Cartoon Network censors. But again, there was violence at the time. Jack would get hurt, but usually he'd get scratched and it would just be like a red mark or something like that. So there was a lot of excitement about not only seeing the show come back, but they've kind of raised the bar in terms of what they can show, because obviously they're doing it through Adult Swim now, and they can get away with a lot more. And what I really liked about this is that they've been very hush-hush about what you're going to see in the new season, or the final season, rather, because this is the final season. And it did raise a few eyebrows. People were like, what are they going to do? But they still had Gendy Tartakovsky. Gendy has never led us astray before, aside from when he just kind of leaves a project, but that's a whole other thing. But it kind of built the anticipation of the show, and it was kind of a genius move, actually. Anyway, as of this video, there's only one new episode out so far, and they're going to have one, I guess, every week until the season ends. So I'm just going to give my general opinion of the episode itself and how well they brought Jack back. And maybe when the series ends, I'll probably do an editorial and just talk about the series as a whole or something like that. There's been a time skip of, I think, 50 years, 50 or 15, I don't remember what they said in the show, but they've established that this is a new Jack, and they even said this is not the same Jack that you're familiar with. You can tell he's been through a whole lot in the time since the last episode of the series, and he's grown a beard, he's got armor, he rides a motorcycle now, and you can tell even personality-wise, something is very different about him. See, the original Jack always had this like glimmer of hope and goodness about him, and then we cut to the new episode where we see Jack is kind of meaner, and something's missing in his character, and it's very hard to place, but you can tell that this is a guy who's been through a lot. Meanwhile, there appears to be some kind of cult called the Daughters of Aku, who are these women who are being trained as assassins to hunt down Jack and finish him off. Now, so far, in terms of the adult stuff, there really hasn't been a whole lot. Like I said, we saw the promo where Jack gets stabbed and you could see him bleeding out. That didn't happen in this episode. But there are two very interesting moments that I do have to bring up. For one, we saw the Daughters of Aku getting born. Yes, they didn't show a whole lot, but they cut to a woman screaming in childbirth, and you can see them getting born. There was 5 of them all at the same time, and what was kind of funny but also kind of messed up is that the woman who gave birth to them, after that, after all the screaming and everything, she just kind of got up, put on her robe and her mask, and did her whole spiel, and everyone was like, she just gave birth to 5 children. How the hell is she getting back up so quickly? And then we cut to their training, and oh boy, they showed the children, when they've grown up a little bit. They're still very little children, but they're being trained very aggressively. They're being hit and thrown around and knocked around, and they keep telling them to get up, you have to keep getting up, and they have to fight these characters that are much larger than they are. There was one scene that I really liked where one of the girls kind of wandered off from the group, and she looked out of the cave that they were training in, and she saw this beautiful environment. It was a forest, and she saw the sunlight for the first time. And the mother of the cult, I guess, I'm actually not sure what her name is yet, but she said, isn't it beautiful? This is all because of our leader, and you have to fight for him, or something like that. Basically telling them that this is all Aku's doing, and it's worth fighting for, going with that whole thing about how even though Aku is evil, this is all that they're going to know, and therefore it's going to be correct. Speaking of Aku, he was noticeably absent from this episode, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, but I do want to address that when this show was announced, people were wondering what they were going to do about Aku, because as we know, Mako, the great Mako, was the voice of Aku, and he tragically passed away some time ago. So they had to find someone to fill those shoes, and Genndy said he did the best he could, and he did pick probably the best candidate, and that was Greg Baldwin, who took over for Mako for the voice of Iroh in the Avatar series. And I actually didn't know this, but Baldwin actually voiced Aku before. He was the voice of Aku in the Cartoon Network game Fusion Fall, back when that was. I don't think that's around anymore. I think that's old, but yeah, I actually didn't know that. So again, they picked the best possible person to voice Aku. The animation is absolutely on par with the original series, and it's every bit as wonderful looking as it was back then. Also the same type of visual storytelling. Jack barely said a word throughout the entire episode. In fact, there really wasn't a whole lot of dialogue in the episode except for one character, but I'll talk about him in a minute. But it's exactly the same as it was. It's telling a story with very little dialogue, and they showed Jack having flashbacks about things that may have happened that they'll probably address later. You can tell he's haunted by his past and thinking maybe he's been a failure and he couldn't save everyone. And this episode has left a lot of questions unanswered, like what happened to Jack in the time skip from the last episode to this episode. Jack's sword was also missing, and they actually addressed that in this episode, and they showed a brief scene of what might have happened to it. So they have to answer what happened to Jack's sword, because that was the one thing that can defeat Aku. And then there's also the question of where is Aku in all this? If these girls, these mysterious girls, are the daughters of Aku, where did he go off to? Or are they just some other, third-party cult that are just worshipping Aku? And you know what? They still kept a little bit of that sense of humor that the show had, because the show wasn't all gritty and action. They knew when to tell a joke every now and then. They knew when to have a silly episode, every once in a while. And there was one character in the new episode that I really liked, and he was this, he was a robot samurai, I guess, and for some reason he was talking and acting like Sammy Davis Jr. And I don't know where that came from, but I really liked him, and I was kind of hoping maybe he would become a recurring villain in the series, for the remainder of the series, but let's just say, unfortunately, we won't be seeing him again. So far, I love what they've been doing. I can't wait to see more, and this has been an amazing comeback, especially for something that we never thought that we'd see again, including myself. I mean, I have to admit, I gave up on Samurai Jack a while ago. I figured, it's done, and we're probably never going to see it again, and Gendy will just move on to other things, which he did, but eventually he came back, and I don't know how he did it, but thank you very much, Gendy. And now, once you're done with Samurai Jack, if you can finish Symbionic Titan, then balance will have been restored once again. So that's all I got for the comeback of Samurai Jack. Leave a comment below and let me know what you thought of it. And tell me what your favorite moment or just episode from the series is. My name is Rob, and just like I said on Twitter, it feels like Jack never left.